Well, good morning, everyone. It is so wonderful to see you all here. For many of you, it's been, well, a year perhaps, and it's terrific to see those of you here on Zoom as well. 50 or so additional people with us this morning on Zoom. But I want to ask, are you as confused and bewildered by these readings as I am? Or does the clarity of message just pop for you? Be honest. I'm a little confused. Even Peter, who clearly from the Gospels was a flaming extrovert, we hear today, hardly knew what to say. In one reading, God commands Abraham to show his loyalty and devotion by sacrificing his only son. Seriously? And then in our gospel, we get this fantastical event that leaves Peter, James, and John dumbstruck, flabbergasted, and ready to put up tents. Really? To what end? What are we supposed to make of this? Why are these readings included in our lectionary and during Lent of all times? And the fact is, I bet you didn't know this, but the fact is, the story of Jesus' transfiguration comes every year on the second Sunday of Lent. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Last year, we heard from Matthew's gospel, this year from Mark's gospel, next year from Luke. But it's the same story. Obviously, it's important to our Lenten journey. But what is that importance? I know this much. We have to do better than Peter, who goes a bit bonkers, wanting to create little huts for Jesus, Elijah, and Moses. But before we go there, I think we have to make at least a little bit of sense from our first reading. What kind of a God would ask Abraham to take his son up into the heights and sacrifice him? As a father of two sons, I struggle with this story. So we need to dig a little deeper. Scripture scholars offer at least three interpretations to explain the story. First, they invite us to think of this akin to the story of Jonah and the big fish, or like the story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho, that the story is not meant to be taken as actual historical events. Think what you read on the front page of the newspaper. This is not front page news, but rather more like a legend with a really important message. Think Sunday editorial in your newspaper. Don't take the plot literally, they say. Instead, focus on the moral of the story, which is love God and remain devoted to God in the same manner that you love and remain devoted to your child. Do this and you will be truly blessed. The original hearers and readers of Genesis, hearers I say because early on it was an oral tradition. The words that we have from Genesis were passed down orally. Those early hearers would have gotten that. They would have understood that. The second interpretation that the scholars offer is perhaps in his zeal to please God, Abraham got the wrong message from God. That God never intended for Isaac to be sacrificed, And so at that moment, God intervened and saved them both. And what was revealed to Abraham is a part of God that he had not seen before, a heart, a huge heart of compassion. Again, the original audience of Genesis just may have gotten that right off. Third, scholars would say to us that since the time of Abraham and the writing of the book of Genesis several thousand years ago, there has been an evolution of how God is understood by us humans, rendering a strictly black and white friend or foe, loyal or traitor relationship with an all-powerful God obsolete and inadequate. It's an image of God that we humans have moved beyond. I'm finding some comfort here. I think all three interpretations have some validity. And when I think about it, I realize I don't have to choose one over the others. I can embrace all three. I can recognize that, one, I need to love God like I love my sons. Two, God has a huge heart of compassion that I am continually discovering and learning. And three, our understanding of God is ever evolving. Okay, let's try to crack this other nut. Why do we get the story of Jesus' transfiguration every year on the second Sunday of Lent? In short, this dazzling white vision, this event, points us toward Easter and challenges us to have a vision, to envision our hopes and our prayers for transformation and renewal during Lent. Lent calls us not just to change, but to be transformed. In other words, don't let your little Lenten promises get in the way of God calling you to something way bigger than you might have ever imagined. The other thing that we learn here is extraordinary events, like a transfiguration, transform and change us, but only if we reflect on them and lean into the change that they call us to. You know what? We've had no shortage of extraordinary events over the last 12 months. I don't even have to name them for you. Our lives have been turned upside down by pandemic, by racial injustice, by so many things. Think of it this way. Every single one of us has had now a pandemic birthday. What was that like for you? How do we allow these events to teach us, to change us, to transform us? Jesus spent 40 days in the desert, and it transformed him. That's why we do 40 days of Lent. And you recall a few weeks ago, our readings pointed to those 40 days, and from those days, he emerged with a calling to preach and to heal. And he became itinerant throughout Galilee, fulfilling that calling, preaching and healing. And then that brings us to today's event, the Transfiguration, and it changed him again. Only now does he turn to his disciples and say that his ministry is turning from preaching and healing to confronting the religious authorities in Jerusalem. And only then does he anticipate that he will suffer and die and rise. All the while, the ones whom we are supposed to identify with, Peter, James, John, are fearful, bewildered, and confused. They don't know what to make of it. And so Jesus wisely tells them, don't talk about it. You'll get it later. Ironically, it's also Peter, James, and John who accompanied Jesus in the garden the night he was betrayed and handed over to the authorities. They couldn't stay awake that night. On this occasion, today, Transfiguration, they are hyped up. Let's build tents. And clueless. In a few weeks' time, in the garden, they are drowsy, can't stay awake, and clueless. I wonder, would you or I have behaved any differently? I doubt it. Yet, we have one advantage over Peter, James, and John. Sure, they were eyewitnesses to all that Jesus did and said, but they were forced to embrace each event in the moment, as it happened, and try to figure it out on the fly. We, on the other hand, already know what's going to happen in 4.5 weeks' time. We are going to relive the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And so we have 4 weeks to pray and discern what this transfigured vision of Jesus and the prophets means. So that when we are sitting right here on Good Friday, hearing the story of Jesus' agony in the garden, we won't go drowsy. Rather, we will draw on our prayers and promises of this Lent and see our way through his passion, his death on the cross, all the way to Sunday morning, resurrection. We will. What's the kicker here? Well, Jesus left his movement in the hands of some pretty confused, bewildered, and bumbling disciples. And yet, it took off. Similarly, Jesus leaves his ministry of compassion and justice in our hands. Will it continue?